Walter Green was 84 years old and lived alone in a small town in Pennsylvania, a place where everyone greeted each other without truly knowing one another. His house was filled with clocks that no longer worked, shelves of heavily underlined books, and old black and white photographs that almost no one looked at anymore. His life was a collection of silent objects, each holding a story he no longer told. Every morning, without fail, he went out for a walk with his worn wooden cane. His route was always the same. He decrossed the old iron bridge that connected the two parts of town separated by the Elk River, but he always stopped halfway across. It wasn't because he was tired, it was habit, a ritual. He'd rest his hands on the cold weathered railing, watch the water flow steadily beneath him, and take a deep, slow breath. It was as if he was checking to make sure the world was still obeying certain basic rules. Then, satisfied, he would continue on his way to the library, where he read old newspapers and history books he already knew by heart. Walter was a quiet man, but his past was anything but. He was a Vietnam War veteran. When he was just 21, he was assigned to the Army Corps of Engineers. He didn't dream of war or glory like some of the other boys. He dreamed of building things that would last, things that would connect people and places long after he was gone. In Vietnam, however, nothing was meant to last. Roads sank into the thick mud, bases were built only to be abandoned weeks later, and bridges were constructed with the full knowledge they might disappear overnight in a flash of fire and smoke. It was a world of impermanence, and Walter quickly learned to work under a pressure most people could never imagine. He learned to measure precisely even when his hands shook with fear. He learned to trust calculations made with the terrifying sound of gunfire in the background. To him, a bridge wasn't just a structure of steel and wood. It was a promise. The promise that someone could cross from one point of danger to another, and maybe, just maybe, make it back alive. A bridge was a lifeline stretched across chaos. One night, the memory of which was seared into his mind, his unit was ordered to finish a temporary bridge before dawn. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the ground to soup. 2 platoons had been cut off on the other side of a raging river, their supplies dwindling, with wounded soldiers among them. The water was rising fast, threatening to swallow everything. Every mistake could be fatal. Walter checked the plans again and again, his mind racing, the weight of dozens of lives resting on his calculations. The margin for error was non-existent. As the first light of dawn broke through the storm clouds, the bridge was finished. He was the first to cross it, a lone figure testing its stability against the churning river. He felt the boards vibrate beneath his boots, felt the raw power of the river pounding below, a hungry beast waiting for a single flaw. He reached the other side. The bridge held. The soldiers crossed after him, their weary faces illuminated by the dim morning light. One of them, barely more than a boy, with fear and gratitude in his eyes, thanked him with a trembling smile. That young man, whose face Walter would never forget, was killed 3 days later in an ambush. Walter carried that memory for decades. He was never able to fully separate the bridge from that face. In his mind, every structure he ever built or inspected became a kind of debt, an unanswered question that echoed in the quiet moments of his life. Did I do enough? After returning to the United States, he tried to build a normal life. He married, had 2 daughters, and worked as a carpenter, and later as a building inspector. He was good at his job, meticulous, thorough, but distant. He loved his family deeply, yet he never knew how to explain what he had left behind in the jungle. He couldn't find the words for the ghosts he carried. His wife, in her own quiet way, understood without asking. She saw the war in the lines around his eyes and the silence he kept. When she passed away, the silence in the house became heavy, almost physical. It was a silence filled with unspoken memories and unresolved grief. The quiet hum of his life grew louder. Years later, the town announced that the old iron bridge, his bridge, would be demolished. Too old, the newspaper article said, unsafe. Walter read the news and felt a knot tighten in his chest, a feeling he couldn't explain. That bridge had become a part of his daily ritual, a silent confidant. He began spending more time there, standing on the structure that had watched the town grow and change. He'd touch the rusted rivets, trace the cracks in the iron with his fingertips, and listen to the rhythmic thrum it made beneath the wheels of passing cars. It was the sound of a thing that had served its purpose, a sound of faithful endurance. A young engineer on the demolition project noticed him and started greeting him each morning with a friendly nod. "Did you work in construction?" the engineer asked one day, curious about the old man who seemed so attached to the bridge. Walter just nodded. "All my life," he replied, his voice quiet. He said nothing more. How could he explain that this bridge was more than just a bridge to him? On the last day before the structure was closed to the public, Walter crossed it at dawn. The air was still, and the river below was calm and reflective. He stopped at the center, in his usual spot, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't think about mistakes or losses. He didn't see the young soldier's face. Instead, he thought about everything that bridge had carried, not just cars and people, but hopes, dreams, decisions, and paths home. He realized he had been building bridges his entire life, both visible and invisible. Bridges that connected his past to his present, bridges that tried to span the gap between what he had seen and the peaceful world around him. Some had fallen, others against all odds were still standing. Weeks later, when the day came for the demolition, Walter didn't go to watch. He had already said his goodbyes. He simply took an alternate route to the library. The new path was longer and slower, but he didn't mind. He no longer felt the need to stop halfway. He had finally crossed over. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please consider sharing it and subscribing for more stories that remind us of the quiet strength all around us.